A millionaire found a boy who lived on the street sleeping in his bed at the mansion. When the boy explained what he was doing there, the millionaire called the police in tears. The Winscott mansion rose majestic in the heart of Boston, in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, Beacon Hill. The last rays of the setting sun tinged the property's immense windows with gold, while a gentle breeze swayed the century-old palms in the meticulously tended garden. Marietta Ashcroft adjusted the silk curtains in the main room, observing the arrival of the luxurious imported black car that brought her employer back from yet another long business trip. The housekeeper sighed, remembering the times when the mansion was filled with joy before Wesley's first wife's death. How this house has changed, she thought to herself as she watched Sylvia, the new Mrs. Winscott, step out of the car with her usual haughty pose. Wesley Winscott got out of the vehicle, weariness etched on his face marked by 45 years of age. Despite his impeccable suit and well-trimmed grey hair, his brown eyes betrayed the weight of responsibilities of commanding one of the country's largest business empires. By his side, Sylvia Flores Winscott, his wife for only 6 months, displayed a calculated smile. Her 32 years shone through her flawless skin, and the designer dress elegantly hugged her curves. "Darling, I'm so glad we're finally back. I miss the comfort of our home so much," she said, interlacing her arm with her husband's. Marietta observed the scene from the second-floor window, her heart tight as she watched how Sylvia manipulated her employer with studied gestures and sweet words. The housekeeper, who had served the Winscott family for over 2 decades, perceived the falsity behind each of the new lady's smiles. "God forgive me for my ill thoughts," she murmured to herself, "but that woman does not love Mr. Wesley. She only wants his money and position." The couple crossed the vast entrance hall, their steps echoing on the Italian marble floor. Wesley stopped for a moment, observing the portrait of his late wife that still occupied a discreet spot on the wall. Sylvia noticed her husband's gaze, and her expression changed for a fraction of a second before returning to the mask of docility. "Love, I'm going upstairs to take a relaxing bath. Why don't you rest a bit before dinner?" she suggested, her melodious voice hiding a note of irritation. Marietta hurried down the stairs to greet her employer, but something stopped her. An almost imperceptible noise coming from the master bedroom caught her attention. With silent steps, the housekeeper approached the half-open door, and her heart almost stopped at the scene she witnessed. Lying on the immense canopy bed slept a boy who couldn't be more than 8 years old. His tattered clothes contrasted violently with the elegance of the Egyptian silk sheets, and his dirty, bruised little face betrayed days, perhaps weeks, living on the streets. The sound of Sylvia's heels climbing the stairs made Marietta hold her breath. The housekeeper knew she needed to do something, but before she could move, her mistress's voice cut through the air like a razor. "What are you standing there for, Marietta? Go prepare my bath immediately." At the same moment, Wesley appeared in the hallway, intrigued by his wife's altered tone. "Did something happen, my love?" he asked, approaching. Sylvia opened her mouth to respond, but the words died on her lips when her eyes landed on the bed. For a moment, heavy silence took hold of the environment, broken only by the sleeping boy's soft breathing. Marietta watched, her heart racing, as Wesley slowly approached the bed. The businessman stopped beside the small intruder, his face a mixture of surprise and compassion. "Call the police immediately," Sylvia shouted, her face contorted in an expression of barely disguised disgust. The noise of the voices began to awaken the boy, who slowly opened his large dark eyes, blinking in confusion at the room's brightness. Upon realizing where he was and who was watching him, the small body began to visibly tremble. "Please don't hurt me," he whispered, his weak, frightened voice echoing through the silent room. Marietta felt tears form in her eyes at the sight of the fear etched on the childish face. Wesley raised his hand in a reassuring gesture, his gentle voice contrasting with the moment's tension. "No one is going to hurt you, little one. What's your name?" The boy hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting from Wesley to Sylvia, who was glaring at him, and finally to Marietta, who offered him a comforting smile. "Ronan," he stammered, shrinking further against the pillows. Marietta noticed the change in her employer's demeanor, the same look he had when his first wife was still alive and talked about having children. "Wesley, you can't be considering," Sylvia began, but was interrupted by her husband. "This boy needs help, Not more trauma, he firmly declared, his decision already made. The housekeeper watched the scene with a mixture of joy and apprehension, noting the dangerous glint in Sylvia's eyes. Little Ronan tried to get up, but his legs gave way. Marietta ran to support him, noticing how feverish he was. "Mr. Winscott, he has a very high fever," she exclaimed worriedly. Wesley immediately approached, gently touching the boy's forehead. "Marietta, prepare the guest room and call Dr. Hensley," he ordered, ignoring Sylvia's contained protests. Ronan looked at everyone with frightened eyes, but there was something more in his gaze, something Marietta couldn't decipher. The boy opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something important, but Sylvia spoke first, her honeyed voice hiding a veiled threat. "Dear, we need to think carefully about this. We don't know anything about this boy." The way she pronounced the last word made Marietta shudder. While Wesley helped Ronan get up, the governess couldn't help but notice the look that Sylvia shot at the boy, a look that promised trouble. Marietta made a silent prayer, asking for protection for that child fate had put in her path. "May God protect us," she thought, "because something tells me this story is only just beginning." Sylvia paced the room like a caged lioness, her high heels tapping a nervous rhythm on the marble floor. Her eyes never left Ronan, who was now seated in an armchair, wrapped in a blanket Marietta had provided. The new Mrs. Winscott clutched her cell phone tightly, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming on the screen. "Wesley, we need to call the police immediately. This boy broke into our home. What if he's dangerous? What if he's stolen something?" Her melodious voice carried a studied tone of urgency. Marietta prepared a herbal tea at the small side table, her experienced hands trembling slightly as she observed the scene. Little Ronan seemed to shrink with each word from Sylvia, his dark eyes brimming with unshed tears. The governess perceived every tremor of the boy, every frightened sigh, and her maternal heart tightened. "Madam, with all due respect, he's just a scared, sick child," Marietta murmured, extending the steaming cup to Ronan. Wesley remained standing by the window, his pensive expression reflected in the glass that mirrored the garden lights. His tense shoulders betrayed the internal conflict he was waging. On one hand, he understood Sylvia's concern for safety. On the other, something in that boy's gaze touched him deeply. "I'm not calling the police, Sylvia," he declared finally, his firm voice leaving no room for arguments. "This boy needs help, not more trauma." Sylvia's face contorted into an expression of barely disguised disgust, quickly replaced by a mask of concern. She approached her husband with calculated steps, her delicate hands resting on his arm. "Darling, I know your heart is kind, but we must think clearly. We know nothing about him. What if he's part of some scheme? What if there are dangerous people looking for him?" Her words were poisoned honey. Ronan coughed violently, his small body shaking with the effort. Marietta rushed to support him, noting with growing concern that the fever seemed to be rising. "Mr. Winscott, he needs a doctor urgently," the governess alerted, shooting a pleading look at her employer. Sylvia rolled her eyes discreetly, her disdain obvious only to Marietta, who watched her closely. The boy tried to get up, his wobbly legs barely supporting his weight. "Please, let me stay just this one night," his voice was but a hoarse whisper. "I promise I'll leave tomorrow morning, before the sun rises." The words came interspersed with another bout of coughing. Marietta felt tears form in her eyes at seeing so much fear and despair in someone so young. Wesley approached Ronan, kneeling to be at eye level with the boy. His eyes, normally hard from years of business negotiations, now showed a softness Marietta hadn't seen since the death of his first wife. "You're not going anywhere in this state, little one. We'll take care of you," he stated, his voice gentle but resolute. Sylvia let out a sound of barely contained indignation, her perfectly painted lips contracting into a thin line. "Wesley, you can't be serious. What will people think? What will society say when they learn we're harboring a street urchin?" Her tone grew increasingly shrill, the mask of kindness beginning to crack. Marietta perceived the exact moment when something shifted in Ronan's gaze. For an instant, a flash of recognition crossed his eyes when Sylvia spoke, immediately followed by a deep terror. The boy started trembling even more intensely, and it wasn't just from the fever. The governess narrowed her eyes, her intuition sharpened by years of service telling her there was more to this story. "Mrs. Sylvia," Marietta spoke up, her normally submissive voice carrying an unusual tone of firmness. "If you'll allow me, I can prepare the guest room for the boy. I promise to keep an eye on him through the night." Sylvia shot a cutting look at the governess, a veiled threat gleaming in her dark eyes. Wesley, oblivious to the growing tension between the two women, was already on the phone with his private physician. "Dr. Hensley, I need you to come to the mansion immediately. We have an emergency." His authoritative voice was back, the one that didn't accept refusals. Ronan watched it all with wide eyes, alternating his gaze between Wesley and Sylvia. A new wave of coughing shook the frail boy's body, this time stronger and more worrying. Marietta supported him quickly, noting with alarm that a thin thread of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Holy Mother of God!" the governess exclaimed, her cry muffled by the hand she brought to her lips. Sylvia took a step back as if the illness were contagious, her face a mask of barely disguised revulsion. Ronan tried to say something, his lips moving without making a sound. His eyes met Sylvia's for a moment, and Marietta swore she saw a flash of plea pass between them. "Mrs." Winscott quickly averted her gaze, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I'll retire to my dressing room," she announced dryly. "I don't want to catch whatever he has." The sound of Sylvia's heels fading down the hallway echoed, leaving behind a heavy silence. Marietta continued holding Ronan, who was now shaking uncontrollably. The governess couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to this story than a simple street boy seeking shelter. "What secret do you carry?" she thought, as she adjusted the blanket around the boy's bony shoulders. Wesley turned his attention to Ronan, his eyes fixed on the pale and bruised face of the child. "Dr. Hensley will be here in 20 minutes, he informed him, his voice trying to convey a calm he didn't feel. "Until then, we'll make you more comfortable." The boy just nodded weakly, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and fever. Marietta noticed with growing concern that his small hands clung to the blanket as if his life depended on it. Minutes later, Dr. Hensley had just left, leaving behind a silence fraught with concern. The diagnosis was serious: severe pneumonia, advanced malnutrition, and various bruises on his body. Ronan was now installed in the guest room, medicated and cleaned, but his breathing still came out in painful gasps. Marietta was adjusting the pillows for the third time, trying to make him more comfortable, when she noticed the boy was trying to say something. His chapped lips moved with effort, his feverish eyes fixed on the door as if he feared someone might enter at any moment. I need to tell," he whispered, his voice no more than a hoarse whisper. Wesley, who was signing some documents at the bedroom desk, immediately approached the bed. His normally stern eyes showed a genuine compassion that Marietta hadn't seen in years. The boy tried to sit up, his small, trembling hands clutching the Egyptian cotton sheets. The housekeeper perceived the superhuman effort he made to keep his eyes open, fighting against the fever and the medication. She, Ronan began, but was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Sylvia entered the room like a perfumed breeze, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. Her face was the very picture of maternal concern, but Marietta noticed the dangerous glint in her eyes when they fixed on Ronan. "Dear, I brought something for our little guest to eat," she announced, her melodious voice echoing through the room. The poor thing must be starving. The boy visibly shrank under the sheets, his pale face turning even whiter. Marietta watched the scene with growing apprehension, her hands busy nervously folding and unfolding her immaculate apron. There was something in the way Ronan reacted to Sylvia's presence that went beyond a street child's simple fear. It was a deep, knowing terror, as if he knew exactly what she was capable of. The housekeeper tried to catch the boy's eye, but he kept his eyes down, trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Perhaps it would be better to let him rest a bit," Marietta suggested, her voice cautious. Sylvia completely ignored the housekeeper's suggestion, placing the tray on the nightstand with a delicate tinkling of fine porcelain. Her movements were studiedly graceful as she sat on the edge of the bed, too close to Ronan. "Wesley, my love, I've been thinking," she began, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. "Perhaps we should let the boy stay for a few days until he fully recovers." Her smile was radiant, but didn't reach her eyes. Ronan's face contorted into an expression of panic, and he again tried to speak. "Mr. Winscott, I need—" His words were interrupted by a violent coughing fit, and Sylvia immediately stood up, as if fearing contamination. Mrs. Winscott backed away a few steps, but her gaze remained fixed on the boy, a silent threat hovering in the air between them. "Poor thing. He's delirious with fever," she commented, her voice laden with false concern. Wesley ran his hand through his graying hair, his demeanor divided between concern and admiration for his wife's apparent change of attitude. "You're right, my love," he agreed, approaching Sylvia and wrapping an arm around her waist. "We can't abandon a sick child." Marietta noticed the triumphant smile that crossed Sylvia's face for a fraction of a second, before being replaced by an expression of tender concern. Ronan squeezed his eyes shut, as if trying to block out the sight of the couple. His small hands clenched into fists on the blanket, and Marietta could see silent tears streaming down his feverish cheeks. The housekeeper felt her heart tighten, her intuition screaming that something was terribly wrong with this situation. "I'll fetch some fresh water," she announced, reluctant to leave the boy alone but needing a moment to organize her thoughts. As soon as Marietta left the room, Sylvia gently disentangled herself from her husband's embrace. "Why don't you go rest a little, dear?" she suggested, her melodious voice laden with false concern. "You've had such a tiring day, and I can stay here taking care of little Ronan." Wesley hesitated for a moment, but the fatigue of the journey was weighing on his shoulders. With a soft kiss on his wife's forehead, he left the room. Sylvia's sweet smile disappeared the instant the door closed behind Wesley. Her eyes, previously overflowing with false compassion, were now two dark pools of malice as they stared at Ronan. The boy tried to shrink further into the bed, his small body trembling uncontrollably. "Don't even think about opening that filthy mouth of yours," she spoke in a low tone, her voice no more than a threatening whisper. "Or you know very well what could happen." Marietta returned at this moment, carrying a pitcher of fresh water. She stopped at the door, feeling the palpable tension in the air. Sylvia had already recomposed her mask of kindness, but the housekeeper caught the last vestige of the threatening look she was giving the boy. Ronan lay motionless in bed, his wide eyes fixed on the void, as if he had seen a ghost. "Is everything all right?" Marietta asked, her voice betraying her concern. The boy merely nodded mechanically, not daring to raise his eyes. Sylvia rose gracefully, smoothing invisible creases in her designer dress. "Well, I'll leave you to rest now," she announced, her voice returning to the honeyed tone from before. "Marietta, take good care of our little guest." The last word came out like a veiled threat, which only the governess and Ronan seemed to catch. At the door, Sylvia paused for a moment, casting one last meaningful look at the boy. Marietta remained by the bedside, observing Ronan's irregular breathing. The boy seemed to have aged years in the last few minutes, his face marked by a fear that went beyond the governess's understanding. She wanted to ask, wanted to understand what was happening, but something in the boy's empty stare stopped her. "What terrible secret do you carry?" she thought, as she adjusted the blankets once more. The ensuing silence was too heavy to be broken by words. Outside, night fell upon the Winscott mansion, bringing with it shadows that seemed to dance on the walls of the room. Ronan finally succumbed to exhaustion and the medication, plunging into a restless sleep. Marietta settled into the armchair near the bed, determined not to leave the boy alone. In the hallway, Sylvia's heels echoed like a sinister reminder that this night was merely the beginning of something far greater and darker than anyone could have imagined. The following morning brought an unusual bustle to the Winscott mansion. Wesley had decided to turn the second-floor guest room into a permanent space for Ronan. The room, which previously served only for occasional visitors, now received special attention. Marietta watched with a mixture of joy and apprehension as her employer personally supervised the reorganization of the space. "I want a new desk here," he ordered, indicating a corner near the window. "And someone needs to go buy proper clothes for the boy." His eyes shone with an enthusiasm he had not displayed in a long time. Sylvia glided into the room like a serpent, her blue silk dress shimmering softly. Her face was carefully made up to conceal any trace of displeasure, and a calculated smile played on her perfectly painted lips. "Darling, I've already arranged for a decorator to help with the room," she announced, her melodious voice echoing through the space. "After all, we want our little guest to feel at home, don't we?" Marietta noticed the slight tremble of revulsion in her voice as she uttered the word guest. Ronan, still weakened by the previous night's fever, sat in an armchair near the window. His dark eyes followed Sylvia's every move like a cornered animal, and his small hands clutched tightly at the blanket Marietta had given him. The governess noticed how the boy shrank whenever the lady of the house approached, how his breathing became more labored, how fear seemed to emanate from every pore of his frail body. "Drink your tea, little one," Marietta murmured, trying to distract him. "It will help with the cough." Wesley's phone rang, momentarily breaking the tension in the room. His face contorted into an expression of concern as he listened to the person on the other end of the line. "I understand. Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as possible," he responded, hanging up with a heavy sigh. Sylvia immediately approached her husband, her eyes gleaming with a curiosity Marietta knew to be feigned. "Business troubles, my love?" The news dropped like a bomb in the room. Wesley would have to travel immediately to Monterey. Her crisis at one of his companies required his personal presence, and he would be gone for at least 3 days. Marietta felt her heart tighten as she saw the momentary panic that crossed Ronan's face. The boy tried to rise from the armchair, but his legs were still too weak. "Please don't go," he whispered, so softly that only the governess could hear. Sylvia immediately took control of the situation, her devoted wife mask firmly in place. "Don't worry, darling," she declared, smoothing the lapel of Wesley's suit with practiced gestures. "I'll personally take care of everything here. Ronan will be in good hands." The way she pronounced the boy's name made Marietta shudder involuntarily. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Wesley prepared for the trip while giving specific instructions regarding Ronan's care. Marietta noticed how Sylvia sweetly agreed to every recommendation, her eyes occasionally shooting icy glares in the boy's direction when her husband wasn't looking. "Don't worry, my love," she repeated like a mantra. "I'll take care of him as if he were our own son." Ronan remained silent, his face growing paler as the moment of Wesley's departure approached. Marietta tried to stay close to the boy, but Sylvia constantly found tasks to keep her occupied in other rooms of the house. "Marietta, please, prepare Mr. Winscott's suitcase," she ordered. "Marietta, make sure the driver is ready." Each order kept her further away from Ronan, leaving him increasingly vulnerable. The time for farewell came all too quickly. Wesley approached the armchair where Ronan was seated, affectionately adjusting the blanket around the boy's shoulders. "Be strong, little one," he murmured, his normally steady voice betraying a hint of emotion. "I'll be back before you know it." Ronan merely nodded, his eyes already brimming with unshed tears. Sylvia accompanied her husband to the front door, perfectly portraying the role of the loving, concerned wife. "Drive carefully, my love," she requested, her voice choked with an emotion Marietta knew to be false. "I'll call every day to keep you informed about our little Ronan." The smile she flashed at her husband was radiant, but her eyes remained as cold as ice. The sound of Wesley's car driving away echoed through the property like a somber omen. Marietta watched from the bedroom window, her heart heavy with a fear she couldn't name. Behind her, she could hear Sylvia's soft footsteps climbing the stairs, returning to the room where Ronan awaited, defenseless. The governess clutched the crucifix at her neck, murmuring a silent prayer. Ronan seemed to have shrunk even further into his armchair, his eyes fixed on the door, like one awaiting the arrival of an executioner. Marietta could see the tremor in his small hands, the palpable fear in every labored breath. "Ma'am," she began, trying to buy time, "perhaps we should let the boy rest a little." Sylvia entered the room like a queen in her domain, her face still bearing the perfect smile she had used to bid farewell to her husband. But there was something different now, a hardness in her eyes, a barely contained cruelty in her gestures. "Marietta," her voice cut the air like a razor, "you may leave. From now on I will personally take care of our little guest." The tension in the room was palpable as Marietta reluctantly headed for the door. Her last glimpse was of Ronan's face, his wide eyes silently begging for help, as Sylvia approached the armchair with calculated steps. The governess closed the door with a heavy heart, knowing the true horrors were only just beginning. "God protect this child," she murmured, as the first sounds of Sylvia's true nature began to echo down the hallway. In the room, now isolated from the rest of the world, Ronan faced his worst nightmare. Sylvia's smile had twisted into something terrible, and her voice, once honeyed, now carried all the venom she had contained in her husband's presence. "Now, you street trash," Sylvia hissed, her heels marking each step like a death sentence as she approached Ronan. "I'll explain to you how things work in this house. You may have fooled my husband with that stray puppy face, but I've seen your kind before, gutter rats who think they can worm their way into decent homes. And you know what happened to them? They simply disappeared. No one misses a dead rat, do they? So listen closely, because I won't repeat myself. If you dare open that filthy mouth of yours to tell what you saw that night, I will personally ensure it's the last thing you do in your miserable life." As soon as Marietta's footsteps faded down the hallway, Sylvia's transformation was immediate and terrifying. Her angelic face twisted into a mask of pure contempt as she closed in on Ronan. With a rough motion, she ripped the blanket covering the boy, tossing it to the floor as if it were contaminated. "Look at you," she hissed, her eyes sparking with hatred. "A piece of street filth, thinking you can show up in my perfect home." Ronan shrank deeper into the armchair, his eyes wide with terror fixed on his torturer's transfigured face. The sound of the blanket dropping caught Marietta's attention, who had paused in the hallway, her maternal intuition setting off every possible alarm. The governess silently approached the door, her heart pounding as she heard Sylvia's cruel voice slicing the air. "Just look at you, you filthy rat. Did you really think my husband would adopt you? That I would allow a street vermin to taint my name? The only family you deserve is the sewer rats you should have never crawled out of." The laughter that followed was icy, sharp as a whetted blade. Ronan tried to rise from the armchair, his weak legs trembling with the effort. Sylvia watched him with a cruel smile, like a cat toying with a cornered rat. "Please, Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. "I don't want to cause any trouble." Sylvia's response was immediate and brutal. With a swift motion, she seized the boy's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the tender flesh. "How you caused trouble the moment you decided to open your filthy mouth that night." Marietta stifled a cry as she heard Ronan's pained whimper. Through the door crack, she could see Sylvia dragging the boy toward the large mirror in the room. "Look at yourself," the woman ordered, forcing Ronan to face his reflection. "A dirty street urchin covered in bruises and disease. Do you really think you can be part of this family?" Tears began streaming down the boy's face as he tried to avert his gaze from his own image. Sylvia's cruelty seemed to escalate by the moment. She released Ronan with a shove, causing him to stumble and fall to the floor. "Do you know what happens to rats that try to mingle with royalty?" she asked, her voice dripping venom. "They get exterminated." The boy tried to crawl away, but Sylvia stalked him, her high heels beating a deadly rhythm on the floor. "And you, little rat, know too much." Marietta could stand it no longer. She burst through the door like a storm. "Enough!" Her normally gentle voice thundered through the room. Sylvia turned, surprised by the intrusion, but quickly regained her composure. "Marietta," she said, her voice reverting to its honeyed tone, "shouldn't you be preparing lunch?" But the governess was not intimidated. She approached Ronan, placing herself between him and Sylvia. The confrontation between the two women was like electricity in the air. Sylvia narrowed her eyes, all pretense of kindness vanishing from her face. "Be careful, Marietta," she warned, her voice low and threatening. "Servants can be easily replaced." The governess felt Ronan clutch the hem of her apron, trembling like a leaf. "I'd rather lose my job than allow you to harm this child," Marietta replied firmly. A dangerous glint flickered in Sylvia's eyes. She moved closer to Marietta, her expensive perfume mingling with the venom of her words. "You have no idea what's at stake here," she whispered. "This little intruder knows things he shouldn't, things that could destroy everything." Ronan let out a muffled sob, and Marietta felt her heart clench as she realized the boy carried a secret far greater than she had imagined. Sylvia began circling the room like a snake about to strike. "Ronan and I know each other from before, don't we, dear?" Her voice was poisoned sugar. The boy began to tremble more violently, and Marietta could feel the terror radiating from his small body. "That night in the alley, what exactly did you see?" Ronan squeezed his eyes shut, as if trying to block out a terrible memory. Marietta held Ronan closer, feeling his feverish little body shaking uncontrollably. "Mrs. Sylvia," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "The boy is sick. He needs to rest." But Sylvia was no longer listening. Her eyes were fixed on Ronan, a mixture of hatred and fear dancing in her dilated pupils. "If you open your mouth," she whispered, "it will be the last thing you do." The air in the room grew even heavier as Sylvia moved closer again, her heels marking each step like a death sentence. "You know, dear Marietta," Sylvia whispered, her sweet voice distilling pure venom, "I've been thinking about your sister. What was her name again? Ah, yes, Carmela. It must be so difficult for her, relying on those expensive medications to survive. It would be such a tragedy if something were to happen to your job. Or worse, if she simply didn't wake up one of these mornings. After all, accidents happen all the time with sick people, don't they?" The governess felt her legs grow weak as Sylvia's cruel smile widened, revealing the deadly snake behind the mask. Ronan began coughing violently, his frail body shaking with the effort. Marietta tried to support him, but Sylvia was quicker. She grabbed the boy's arm tightly, pulling him close. "You're not going to ruin everything I've worked for," she whispered in his ear. "Understood?" The boy merely nodded, silent tears streaming down his pale face. Marietta watched helplessly as Sylvia released Ronan with a disdainful shove. "Now," she said, smoothing her dress perfectly, "I'm going downstairs to make an important call. When I return, I expect everyone here to have understood their places." Her gaze swept from Marietta to Ronan, the threat clear in every syllable. As Sylvia headed for the door, her posture already returning to its studied perfection, Ronan whispered something so low that only Marietta could hear. She did something terrible. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Sylvia stopped at the doorway, her body tensing like a coiled snake. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice no more than a deadly hiss. The secret hung in the air like a dark cloud over everyone in the room. Marietta held Ronan protectively, while Sylvia remained poised at the door, her silhouette cutting a malignant shadow against the hall light. Danger was palpable, and the governess knew things were about to get much worse. Night fell over the Winscott mansion like a suffocating shroud. The silence was broken only by Ronan's labored breathing as he burned with fever in the room Wesley had prepared. Marietta pressed cold compresses to the boy's forehead, watching with growing concern as red splotches began spreading across his neck. The pneumonia was clearly worsening, and the stress of the confrontation with Sylvia only exacerbated his condition. "Please, little one, hang in there," the governess whispered, changing the cloth on his brow once more. Sylvia remained a vigilant shadow in the mansion, her heels echoing through the hallways at regular intervals, as if patrolling her fortress. Each time she passed the bedroom door, she would peer through the crack with a piercing gaze, ensuring her secret remained locked away. Marietta could feel the mistress's menacing presence even when she was unseen. "No doctor is to be called without my permission," she had declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. Ronan's temperature continued its dangerous climb. His words, once a coherent whisper, now devolved into delirious murmurings. "The alley. Blood? Please, no," he would repeat, his eyes moving frantically behind closed lids. Marietta felt her heart clench with each disjointed new word, each one seeming like a piece of a macabre puzzle beginning to take shape. In a moment of lucidity, Ronan gripped Marietta's hand with surprising strength for someone so debilitated. "She was there," he mumbled, his feverish eyes fixed on something only he could see. "In the alley behind the restaurant." The man screamed, "And she... His voice failed, choked off by a new coughing fit. Marietta leaned in closer, her heart racing at the potential revelation, but Sylvia chose that precise moment to enter the room. "Mrs." Winscott glided into the chamber like a striking snake, her eyes quickly assessing the scene before her. "And how is our little patient?" she asked, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Marietta straightened abruptly, positioning herself protectively between Sylvia and Ronan. "The fever won't break, ma'am. He needs a doctor urgently." Sylvia approached the bedside in measured steps, each movement calculated to maximize intimidation. Her long, perfectly manicured fingers lightly touched Ronan's forehead in a gesture that seemed more threat than care. "Nonsense," she declared, withdrawing her hand with a dismissive wave. "It's just a little fever. Give him the medicines Dr. Hensley prescribed yesterday, and he'll be fine in no time." Marietta watched helplessly as Ronan struggled more and more in his restless sleep. The governess knew she needed to do something, and quickly. She waited until Sylvia left the room to fetch her cell phone, hidden in her apron pocket. Her hands were shaking as she dialed Wesley's number, silently praying that he would answer. The phone had barely begun to ring when a perfectly manicured hand snatched it from her fingers. Sylvia was standing in the doorway, her eyes sparking with restrained fury. "Looking for this?" she asked, waving Marietta's phone like a trophy. "What a coincidence. I just spoke with Wesley and informed him that everything is perfectly fine here." Her smile was as chilled as a winter's night. "In fact, I mentioned that Ronan is showing excellent improvement." Panic began to take hold of Marietta as she realized she was completely isolated. Sylvia had effectively cut off all her lines of communication with the outside world. "If he dies," the governess began, her voice trembling with suppressed rage, "Mr. Winscott will know everything." "Oh dear, Marietta," Sylvia laughed, her laughter echoing like broken crystals. "You really think anyone will believe a lowly maid and a street rat over me? I am Sylvia Winscott, the perfect wife, the society dame. I can destroy you both with a single phone call. And do you know what's most delicious? Wesley will console me after your precious street boy dies of natural causes." Her smile was as icy as her murderous eyes. The night wore on, and with it Ronan's condition rapidly deteriorated. His breathing was becoming more and more labored, and the blotches on his neck now spread across his chest. Marietta tried desperately to bring down his fever with cold compresses, but nothing seemed to work. "Madam, for God's sake," she pleaded when Sylvia made her nightly rounds. "He will die if he does not receive help." Sylvia paused in the doorway, her face a mask of false concern. "You know, Marietta," she began, her voice dangerously soft, "accidents happen all the time with street children. They turn up ill, they get help. But sometimes the help comes too late." Her eyes met Marietta's with a clear threat. "It would be a pity if that happened to our little Ronan, wouldn't it?" The sound of Ronan's labored breathing filled the room like a funeral dirge. Marietta held his small hot hand, feeling utterly powerless. In his delirium, the boy began to mumble again. "The man," he begged, but she, the knife. Sylvia moved like lightning, approaching the bed with murderous eyes. Marietta placed herself between Sylvia and Ronan, knowing she was outmatched. Mrs. Winscott smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Take good care of him tonight, Marietta," she ordered, heading for the door. "And remember, no phone calls." The threat in her voice was as clear as crystal. As the night wore on, Marietta kept her anguished vigil by Ronan's side. The boy alternated between bouts of feverish delirium and periods of deep unconsciousness. The governess knew she was waging a battle against time, and she was losing. "God help me," she murmured, clutching her crucifix. "What can I do?" Outside, the full moon cast sinister shadows through the mansion's windows. In the hallway, Sylvia's heels kept up their steady rhythm, like the ticking of a clock, marking the moments that could be Ronan's last. Marietta looked at the feverish boy, then at the door, and made a decision that could cost her life. There had to be a way to save that child, even if it meant facing the demon in person, who now ruled the Winscott mansion. Outside the room, Sylvia smiled at the sound of Ronan's increasingly labored breathing. Her plan was working perfectly. Soon her little problem would disappear forever, taking the terrible secret of that night in the alley with him, and no one would ever know the truth. The sound of tires on the mansion's driveway cut through the pre-dawn silence like thunder. Wesley had returned a day earlier than expected, alerted by an anonymous call about Ronan's grave condition. Marietta ran to the window, her prayers finally answered, while Sylvia hurried down the stairs, adjusting her silk robe and rehearsing her best concerned expression. The businessman barely waited for the car to stop before leaping out, his normally composed face twisted in anguish. "Where is the boy?" his voice thundered through the entrance hall. Sylvia glided into her husband's arms like a silky serpent, her eyes glistening with meticulously rehearsed tears. "Oh, my love, how good that you're back," she exclaimed, her voice choked with false emotion. "I have been so dedicated, staying by his side night and day, but the fever simply won't break." Her perfectly manicured hands clutched at Wesley's shirt, staining it with little smudges of makeup she had purposefully left on as proof of her sleepless nights. In the room, Ronan burned with fever, his small body racked by violent shivers. Marietta desperately tried to bring his temperature down with cold compresses, whispering words of comfort in his ear. The sound of Wesley's footsteps climbing the stairs was like music to her weary ears, but fear still gripped her heart. The last 48 hours under Sylvia's reign of terror having left deep scars on all. "Hold on a little longer, little one," she murmured, switching out the cloth on his forehead once more. Sylvia entered the room first, positioning herself strategically beside Ronan's bed. Her hands rested delicately on the boy's shoulders, a gesture that to any unwary observer would seem pure maternal affection. But Marietta could see the long fingers pressing lightly against the feverish skin, a silent and clear threat. "You see, dear, how I have personally cared for him," she declared, her melodious voice masking the underlying cruelty. Wesley approached the bed, his face paling at the sight of the boy's condition. Ronan was even thinner than when he had left him, his sunken cheeks and hollow eyes betraying days of suffering. "Why didn't you warn me sooner?" he questioned, his voice trembling with concern. Sylvia immediately intervened, her words flowing like poisoned honey. "My love, we didn't want to worry you during your important trip. I thought I could care for him with the medicines Dr. Hensley had prescribed." Marietta observed the scene with a lump in her throat, her hands nervously gripping her apron. Every word from Sylvia was a carefully constructed lie, every gesture a performance worthy of a consummate actress. "You didn't let anyone call the doctor," the governess thought bitterly, remembering the endless nights listening to Ronan's groans of pain. But for now, she needed to remain silent. One wrong move, and Sylvia could make the situation even worse. Ronan opened his eyes briefly upon hearing Wesley's voice, a spark of hope crossing his feverish gaze. He tried to speak, but Sylvia was quicker, adjusting the pillows in such a way that the abrupt movement caused a new wave of coughing in the boy. "Don't strain yourself, dear," she said, her voice sweet as saccharine. "Mommy Sylvia is here to take care of you." Marietta saw the terror pass through the boy's eyes at those words. Wesley's decision was immediate and irrevocable. Ronan would be taken to the private hospital at once. Sylvia, of course, offered to accompany them, her hands never leaving the boy's shoulder for a second. "Of course I'll come along, my love. I cannot abandon our little one now after so many nights caring for him." Her smile was radiant, but her eyes remained as cold as ice. Marietta quickly packed a small bag with clothes for Ronan, her hands trembling as she folded each piece. She knew she needed to find a way to go to the hospital too. Leaving the boy alone with Sylvia would be like handing a lamb over to a hungry wolf. "Mr. Winscott," she began cautiously, "perhaps I could help with the boy's care at the hospital." Sylvia shot a sharp look at the governess, but before she could protest, Wesley readily agreed. "Excellent idea, Marietta. You know his medication routine." Mrs. Winscott maintained her perfectly rehearsed smile, but her eyes promised retaliation. "How considerate of you, Marietta," she said, each syllable dripping with disguised venom. The journey to the hospital was tense, with Sylvia keeping Ronan close to her in the back seat of the Mercedes, her nails occasionally digging into the boy's arm whenever he seemed about to speak. Marietta followed closely in another car, her heart pounding with worry. Through the glass she could see Sylvia periodically leaning over Ronan, her lips moving in words the governess could only imagine were new threats. At the hospital entrance, Sylvia assumed the role of devoted mother with theatrical perfection. Her tear-filled eyes and choked voice quickly convinced the medical staff of her devotion to the boy. "I don't know what I would do if anything happened to him," she declared, dabbing at a perfectly timed tear. Marietta observed closely, noting how Sylvia's fingers intertwined with Ronan's in a grip that seemed more like a claw than a comforting gesture. As the doctors examined Ronan, Sylvia didn't leave Wesley's side, fueling her performance with small gestures of concern and maternal love. "You should rest a bit, my love," she whispered, massaging her husband's tense shoulders. "I'll stay here with our little one." Her gaze met Marietta's across the corridor, a silent warning glinting in her dark pupils. Ronan was immediately admitted to the pediatric ward, his condition considered serious by the doctors. Marietta secured a place as an attendant, arguing that she could assist with nighttime care so the couple could rest. Sylvia accepted the suggestion with a forced smile, but not before leaning over Ronan's bed one last time. "Remember, dear," she whispered, her lips almost touching the boy's ear, "Mommy Sylvia is always near." The hospital room, with its white walls and constantly beeping machines, became the new battlefield. Sylvia orchestrated her visits with military precision, always ensuring moments alone with Ronan, always maintaining her mask of perfection in front of others. Marietta watched, powerless as the terror in the boy's eyes grew with each visit from the devoted mother. God help us, the governess thought, for this nightmare is far from over. The doctor's office seemed even colder when Dr. Ramirez delivered the diagnosis: severe pneumonia, with complications caused by the lack of proper treatment in recent days. Wesley held Ronan's hand, while Sylvia maintained her impeccable performance as a devoted mother, her eyes artfully teary. "Doctor, we did everything we could at home," she lied, her voice trembling just right. But Marietta, standing discreetly in the corner of the room, noticed the glint of satisfaction that crossed her mistress's gaze when the doctor mentioned the risk of death. As soon as Wesley left to arrange the admission, Sylvia transformed instantly. She leaned over Ronan's bed, her fingers gripping the boy's arm with enough force to leave marks. "Look at the disgrace you've brought to my home, you filthy worm," Sylvia hissed, her hot breath like poison against Ronan's face. "A foul beggar, reeking of sewage, thinking you can mingle with high society folk. You shouldn't even be alive, you know. People like you should die on the streets like the rats you are, but no. You had to crawl into my home, contaminate my silk sheets with your stench of poverty, make my husband pity you. Disgust. That's what you give me. Disgust." Marietta pretended to organize Ronan's belongings, trying to stay close enough to listen and, if necessary, intervene. Sylvia continued her cruel monologue, every word chosen to cut deeper. "Look at you, gutter worm." Sylvia spat the words with revulsion. "Do you really think my husband will want a sick rat like you as a son? A filthy parasite not even your own parents could stand? Wesley is just amusing himself with his new charity project, but he'll soon realize that trash is trash, no matter how much perfume you douse it in. And when he tires of you, I'll make sure to throw you back into the gutter where you never should have crawled out of." The heart monitor began to beep more rapidly, registering Ronan's stress. The boy tried to sit up, his feverish eyes fixed on a point beyond Sylvia where Marietta stood. I need to tell," he began, his voice no more than a hoarse whisper. Sylvia reacted with the speed of a snake, her hand covering the boy's mouth with false delicacy. "Shh, dear, you're delirious with fever. You don't want to end up in one of those community orphanages, do you? Those places are terrible for sick children." The threat hung in the air like poison, making Ronan shrink back against the pillows. Marietta clutched her crucifix, her anger growing as she watched silent tears roll down the boy's pale cheeks. Sylvia continued, each word dripping with cruelty. "Do you know what happens to street rats in orphanages?" Sylvia whispered with a cruel smile. "They disappear, little worm. No one looks for them. No one cares. They're thrown into common graves like the trash they are. And you, a sickly, weak, useless thing like you wouldn't last a week. So be a good boy and stay quiet, or I'll personally make sure you get to know the true meaning of suffering." The sound of Sylvia's heels on the hospital floor marked a sinister rhythm as she circled the room like a predator. "You know, Ronan," she said, pausing to adjust a lock of hair in the mirror, "there are so many accidents that can happen in hospitals. Medications mixed up, machines failing. Especially with patients who have no one to look out for their interests." Marietta could take no more. She stepped forward, purposefully dropping a tray of water with a clatter. The noise startled Sylvia, who turned with her rehearsed grace. "Oh, Marietta, how clumsy!" she exclaimed, her tone instantly returning to a sweet falsetto. "Let me help you with that." But her eyes sent a clear message to the governess. "You'll pay for that intrusion." Ronan seized the momentary distraction to try again. "Mr. Winscott needs to know." His voice failed as Sylvia spun on her heels, abandoning the pretense of helping Marietta. In 2 strides, she was back at the bedside, her crimson nails contrasting with the boy's pale skin as she gripped his arm. "Needs to know what, dear? That you're an ungrateful liar? That you're trying to destroy a happy family?" The heart monitor spiked again, drawing the attention of a passing nurse. Sylvia immediately assumed her concerned mother pose, caressing Ronan's hair with false tenderness. "Shh, my love, Mama's here," she cooed sweetly as the nurse checked his vitals. Marietta watched helpless as Sylvia masterfully manipulated the situation. As soon as they were alone again, Sylvia leaned in to whisper in Ronan's ear, If you dare open your filthy mouth to tell anything about that night, I swear I'll make your short, miserable life seem like paradise compared to what's in store for you." Her words were low, but Marietta caught every venomous syllable, her blood boiling with indignation. The boy began coughing violently, his frail body racked with the effort. Sylvia recoiled with barely disguised disgust, as though illness were contagious. "What a pitiful scene," she commented, reapplying her lipstick in the mirror. "You know, Marietta, maybe that orphanage is the best option after all. Sick children are so much trouble." Marietta moved to help Ronan, but the look Sylvia shot her froze her in place. "Don't come near," she ordered, her voice razor-sharp. "I don't want you catching any of those street diseases. After all, who would care for your precious little sister if you fell ill too?" The veiled threat made the governess retreat, her heart breaking as she watched Ronan struggle alone through another coughing fit. Wesley chose that moment to return to the room, finding Sylvia comforting a weeping Ronan. "Oh, my love," she said, her voice brimming with false concern. "He's so scared of all this hospital environment." Marietta watched, sickened, as Sylvia performed yet another act of her macabre theatre, knowing Ronan's true terror had nothing to do with the hospital. In the hallway, the echo of Sylvia's footsteps was a constant reminder of her threatening presence. Ronan had finally succumbed to exhaustion, slipping into a fitful sleep. Marietta remained vigilant, her hands trembling with contained rage. "God is witness," she thought. "This woman is the devil himself dressed as an angel." The heart monitor continued its steady beeping, like a countdown to something terrible looming ahead. The night at the hospital turned into a nightmare when Ronan began having a severe respiratory crisis. The monitors erupted in a chorus of alarms as the boy struggled desperately for air, his face taking on a frightening purplish hue. Marietta ran to get help, but Sylvia was already there, playing the role of devoted mother to perfection. "My baby!" she screamed, strategically positioning herself between Ronan and Wesley, who had just entered the room. "Somebody help my little one." As the medical team worked to stabilize Ronan, Marietta noticed something falling from Sylvia's coat pocket, a small yellowed newspaper clipping. With the confusion in the room, the housekeeper managed to discreetly retrieve the paper from the floor. Her hands trembled as she read the partially visible headline, "Businessman Found." Before she could read further, she had to quickly hide the clipping in her apron, for Sylvia had turned in her direction. Ronan finally managed to catch his breath a little, his wide eyes fixed on Wesley, who held his hand with paternal concern. The boy tried to speak, his lips moving with effort. "Need to tell her." But Sylvia was faster, efficiently knocking over a cup of water onto the bed. "Oh, how clumsy of me," she exclaimed, using the commotion to push Wesley away. "Dear, fetch more towels while I take care of our little angel." Marietta took advantage of a moment of distraction to examine the newspaper clipping more closely, hidden in the bathroom. The date was exactly 1 month before Sylvia appeared in Wesley's life. The housekeeper felt her blood run cold as she recognized the alley mentioned in the report. It was the same one where Ronan used to sleep before showing up at the mansion. "Holy Mother of God," she murmured, the pieces starting to fit together. Sylvia watched Ronan with predatory eyes, noticing how he seemed more agitated whenever Wesley drew near. A suspicion began to grow in her poisonous mind. She approached the bed when they were momentarily alone, her fingers gripping the boy's arm with calculated force. "What exactly did you see that night, little rat?" she hissed. Ronan's panicked reaction confirmed her suspicions. The heart monitor went off again as Ronan tried to pull away from Sylvia, but she kept her grip firm. "So that's it," she whispered, a cruel smile forming on her perfectly painted lips. "You were there. You saw everything." Her eyes gleamed with icy malice as her mind already plotted a plan. "Do you know what happens to inconvenient witnesses in hospitals? Accidents happen all the time." Marietta returned to the room just in time to hear the end of Sylvia's threat, her heart racing as she saw the terror in Ronan's eyes. The housekeeper clutched the newspaper clipping in her pocket, knowing she held a crucial clue. She needed to find a way to protect the boy and expose Sylvia's true nature. But one misstep could cost Ronan his life. Wesley returned with the towels, finding Sylvia softly humming by Ronan's bedside. "He's finally calmed down," she said, her sweet voice hiding the venom behind her words. "I think we should let him rest, my love." Her eyes met Marietta's with a silent warning. "Don't even think about interfering." The night dragged on slowly, each minute laden with tension. Marietta watched Sylvia move around the room like a snake preparing to strike, accidentally rearranging the tubes and machines connected to Ronan. "I need to be very careful," the housekeeper thought. One wrong step and she might do something terrible. Ronan drifted in and out of consciousness and feverish delirium, his eyes always desperately seeking help when he woke. During one of those moments, he managed to grab Marietta's hand, his fingers trembling as he whispered, "The alley. Her. The knife." Sylvia appeared like a shadow behind the housekeeper, her voice cutting the air like a blade. Hallucinating again, poor thing. Marietta realized that Sylvia was starting to lay out her diabolical plan. The villainess made detailed notes about the nurses' schedules, studied the monitors and machines with suspicious interest, always keeping her angelic smile when someone entered the room. "We need to make sure our little angel receives the best possible care," she would say, each word laden with obscure meanings. Sylvia's phone rang, and she stepped out to take the call in the hallway. Marietta took the opportunity to examine the newspaper clipping more closely, her heart nearly stopping as she read the details. The businessman had been found with multiple stab wounds, his documents and money untouched, ruling out robbery. The date, the location, everything matched up with Sylvia's arrival in Wesley's life. As the early morning hours dragged on, Marietta noticed Sylvia making a suspicious call. "Yes, I need it done today," she whispered into the phone. "No, nothing that can be traced. It has to look natural." The housekeeper felt her blood run cold. Sylvia was plotting something terrible, and she needed to act quickly to save Ronan. Wesley finally succumbed to exhaustion and was persuaded by Sylvia to go home and rest. "Don't worry, my love," she said, kissing him softly. "I'll stay here and look after our little angel." Her smile was sweet, but her eyes shone with calculated cruelty as she watched her husband leave. Sylvia's plan began to take shape in the shadows of the hospital night. Marietta could feel the tension building in the air, like the calm before a devastating storm. The newspaper clipping burned in her pocket like a ticking bomb, while Ronan slept a restless sleep, oblivious to the mortal danger closing in. The housekeeper knew the next few hours would be decisive. It was a race against time to save the boy's life, before Sylvia executed her diabolical plan. The return to the Winscott mansion happened on a cloudy autumn afternoon. Ronan, still pale and visibly debilitated, crossed the gates of the property in Wesley's arms, while Sylvia followed closely behind, her mask of maternal concern perfectly adjusted. Marietta observed the scene from the main entrance, her heart tight as she noticed how much the boy had further thinned during the hospitalization. "We'll take very good care of him," Sylvia declared, her melodious voice hiding a threat that only Ronan and Marietta could perceive. "After all, I'm his private nurse now." The routine at the mansion quickly transformed into an elaborate theater, where Sylvia occupied the leading role as the dedicated caregiver. She had turned Ronan's room into a sort of makeshift infirmary, with meticulously organized medications and a chair strategically positioned beside the bed. "Dear," her sugary voice echoed through the corridors when Wesley was nearby, "I think it's time for our little one's medicine." But Marietta noticed how the bottles seemed different every day, how the doses never corresponded to the original hospital prescriptions. The nights at the mansion became a silent nightmare. Marietta, unable to sleep, spent hours hidden near Ronan's room, witnessing Sylvia's transformation as soon as Wesley retired to sleep. "So, filthy rodent," she whispered to the trembling boy, "still want to tell your little secrets to someone? Or have you already understood that your miserable life depends on my mood?" Ronan's muffled sobs were the only answer echoing through the darkness. Wesley began to notice small inconsistencies in his wife's behavior. During one dinner, he questioned the amount of medication that appeared on the pharmacy bills. "My love," Sylvia promptly responded, her fingers drumming nervously on the crystal glass. "Some doses needed to be readjusted. You know how these street kids have bodies resistant to normal treatments." Her smile did not reach her eyes, which remained cold as ice. Marietta found an opportunity to examine the medications when Sylvia left for one of her social engagements. Hidden in Ronan's room, the governess discovered adulterated bottles, some completely different from the original prescriptions. Good heavens, she murmured, her hands trembling as she held a vial with a suspicious liquid. She's poisoning him slowly. The sound of Sylvia's heels in the corridor made her quickly hide the evidence. Sylvia's manipulation extended to all aspects of life in the mansion. She had convinced Wesley to dismiss part of the household staff, further isolating Ronan and Marietta. We need privacy to properly care for the boy, she argued, while secretly destroying any possibility of witnesses. The fewer people circulating, the lower the risk of infections. Don't you agree, dear? Ronan desperately tried to communicate his fear through silent glances. During meals, when he managed to sit at the table, his eyes pleaded for help, while Sylvia lovingly insisted on serving his food personally. Every spoonful is prepared with love, she said, her voice as sweet as poison, as she mixed unknown substances into the boy's plate. Marietta watched, powerless, knowing that any direct intervention would put Ronan's life at even greater risk. The home medical visits became a spectacle of their own. Sylvia orchestrated every moment, with cinematic precision, ensuring that Ronan was drugged enough not to reveal anything compromising. He has been so sleepy lately, doctor, she explained, crocodile tears glistening in her eyes. It must be the trauma of so much time on the streets, poor thing. The doctor, completely enveloped by her performance, merely nodded understandingly. Wesley began to show signs of unease with the situation. One night, after finding Ronan particularly lethargic, he confronted Sylvia about the treatment methods. Don't you think we should seek a second medical opinion? He suggested, closely observing his wife's reaction. Sylvia's mask faltered for a moment before she responded with feigned indignation. Are you doubting my love for him? After all the sacrifice I have made? Marietta discovered a sinister pattern in the times when Sylvia administered the medications. Whenever Ronan seemed more lucid, or when Wesley showed interest in talking to the boy alone, a new dose was quickly administered. It's for his own good, Sylvia sweetly justified. The doctor said we can't delay any medication. Her gaze, however, carried a clear threat to anyone who dared question her. Ronan's health visibly deteriorated under Sylvia's care. His cheeks, once merely pale, now took on a sickly greenish hue. His eyes, which had still held a glimmer of hope in those first days, became increasingly opaque and distant. I don't know how much longer he'll last, Marietta thought, her nights now dedicated to praying for the boy and finding a way to save him. During a particularly tense moment, Wesley caught Sylvia altering the medication labels. What are you doing? He asked, his voice laden with suspicion. Her reaction was immediate and rehearsed. Love, I'm just better organizing the medicines. You know how those tiny letters can be confusing. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she put the bottles away. Ronan's nightmares became more frequent and violent. During the night, his screams echoed through the mansion. No, please, not the knife. Sylvia quickly turned these moments into opportunities to reinforce her image as a dedicated caregiver, rushing to calm the boy with more doses of her mysterious medications. Hush, dear, Mama Sylvia is here, she whispered as she forced yet another suspicious liquid down the boy's throat. The siege began to close in around everyone in the mansion. Marietta realized how each day brought new layers of control and manipulation from Sylvia. The governess kept a secret diary documenting every suspicious incident, every medication change, every shift in Ronan's behavior. I need to gather enough evidence, she thought, before it's too late. One afternoon, while changing Ronan's sheets, Marietta found a small note hidden under the pillow, written in a shaky hand. Help. She's killing me slowly. Before she could react, Sylvia appeared at the bedroom door, her icy smile more menacing than ever. Found something interesting, dear Marietta? She asked, her eyes fixed on the governess's trembling hands. Sylvia's plan to silence Ronan became even crueler during mealtimes. With an angelic smile, she insisted on personally supervising every moment the boy tried to eat. No, dear, she would say, removing the plate when Ronan had barely touched the food. You seem so tired. It's best to rest a little. Wesley, on the other side of the table, would frown as he saw the adopted son growing thinner and thinner. But Sylvia always had a convincing explanation on the tip of her tongue. Marietta watched helplessly as Ronan wasted away day after day. The governess tried to secretly leave snacks in the boy's room, but Sylvia seemed to have eyes everywhere. "How kind of you to worry, Marietta," she said one afternoon, holding a sandwich she had intercepted. "But we need to follow a strict diet. After all, we don't want him to get sick, do we?" Her smile was icy as she threw the food in the trash. Sylvia's emotional blackmail revealed its darkest face when she discovered Marietta's secret diary. One night, she cornered the governess in the dark hallway, violently pushing her against the wall. "Listen closely, you meddlesome maid," she hissed, her red nails digging deep into Marietta's throat. "Your little sister Carmela is so fragile, isn't she? It would be tragic if she received the wrong insulin dose, or if her medications were switched. I've seen people die slow, painful deaths, Marietta. Your sister would beg for death before the end, so burn that diary, or Carmela will be the next to mysteriously disappear." Her smile was as cold as death as she tightened her grip around the governess's neck. Ronan's attempts to call for help became increasingly desperate and creative. During a visit from the family doctor, the boy managed to write the abbreviation for the word help on a piece of paper, but Sylvia intercepted the message before it reached its destination. "Oh, doctor, look," she laughed, crumpling the paper. "Our little artist loves to draw. It's a pity the fever leaves him so confused." Ronan's deteriorating health was visible to everyone except those Sylvia could manipulate, with her flawless performance as a devoted mother. The boy could barely get out of bed, his eyes always glazed and distant due to the adulterated medications he was forced to take. "Is this excessive drowsiness normal?" Wesley questioned one night, but Sylvia was already prepared. "The doctor said it's part of the recovery process, my love. Trust me." Marietta found Ronan crying silently in his room one afternoon, his small hands trembling as he tried to hide a piece of stale bread under the pillow. "Please," he whispered between sobs. "I'm so hungry." The governess felt her heart break, knowing that any attempt to help would be discovered by Sylvia, who seemed to have turned the mansion into her own personal fortress. Wesley's suspicions grew with each passing day, fueled by small details that didn't go unnoticed. Medicine bottles with different labels, untouched food, the fear in Ronan's eyes whenever Sylvia approached. "Maybe we should seek another doctor," he suggested during dinner, closely observing his wife's reaction. Sylvia's fork stopped mid-air for a split second before she regained her composure. The blackmail now extended to all the mansion's employees. Sylvia had discovered secrets and vulnerabilities of each one, using them as weapons to maintain her reign of terror. "It's amazing how cooperative people become when they have something to lose," she casually commented to Marietta, while helping Ronan with another dose of his special medications. The weight of guilt began to crush Marietta, who saw Ronan wasting away a little more each day. During a particularly difficult night, she found the boy delirious with fever, muttering about knives and dark alleys. "Please, don't let her finish me." Ronan pleaded in his delirium, words that chilled the governess's blood. Wesley finally decided to take more direct action after finding several empty medicine bottles in the trash, with labels that didn't match the original prescriptions. He confronted Sylvia in her office, demanding explanations. Sylvia's mask of perfection wavered for a moment, but she quickly regained control. "Dear, you're letting your imagination deceive you. Do you really want to believe in coincidences and not your devoted wife?" The situation reached a critical point when Marietta found a hidden diary under Ronan's mattress, describing in confused details what he had witnessed that fateful night in the alley. Before she could read any further, Sylvia appeared like a sinister apparition at the bedroom door. "Looking for something in particular, dear Marietta?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the notebook the governess tried to hide. The noose tightened around Ronan and Marietta. Sylvia had cut off almost all lines of communication with the outside world, even controlling the mansion's phone calls. "It's to protect our little one from negative influences," she sweetly explained to Wesley, while shooting threatening glances at Marietta and Ronan. The tension in the mansion reached unbearable levels during a particularly difficult dinner. Ronan, forced to sit at the table despite his extreme weakness, watched in terror as Sylvia lovingly prepared his plate. "Every bite is an act of love," she declared, her eyes glinting with barely contained cruelty, as she added something to the boy's juice when she thought no one was looking. The final blow came when Sylvia found the notes Marietta kept about her suspicious activities. Cornering the governess in the empty kitchen, her voice was pure venom. Do you know what happens to maids who don't know their place, Marietta? They disappear, and nobody, absolutely nobody, misses one more dead maid in a tragic accident. Marietta watched with a lump in her throat as Ronan struggled to keep his eyes open during dinner. Sylvia had doubled the dose of the adulterated medications, realizing that Wesley was becoming increasingly suspicious. Just a little longer, the governess thought desperately. I need to find a way to save this boy before it's too late. The sound of Ronan's spoon hitting the plate as he lost consciousness echoed through the room like a gunshot. Dinner at the Winscott mansion descended into chaos when Ronan, after drinking the juice prepared by Sylvia, began to violently choke. His wide eyes desperately sought out Marietta's as his small hand clutched at his throat. Within seconds, the boy collapsed onto the table, knocking over glasses and plates. "My God, Ronan!" Wesley shouted, rising abruptly. Sylvia, however, remained strangely calm, delicately dabbing the corners of her mouth with the linen napkin. Panic gripped the room as Ronan's body began to convulse. Marietta ran towards the phone, but Sylvia intercepted her path with surprising agility. "Don't be hasty, dear," she said, her sweet voice masking a deadly threat. "It's probably just a reaction to the medication. Let's wait a little before causing all this commotion." Her eyes sparked dangerously as her red nails dug into the governess's arm. Wesley was desperately trying to revive Ronan, but the boy remained unconscious, his breathing growing shallower. "He needs a doctor now," he demanded, his face twisted with worry. Sylvia quickly assumed her role as devoted nurse, suggesting with false sweetness, "Dear, let me take him to his room. I have all the necessary medication upstairs." Marietta watched in horror as the villain tried to take control of the situation. It was at this moment that Marietta made a decision that could cost her life. Taking advantage of the confusion, she ran to the kitchen where she kept an old hidden cell phone. With trembling hands, she dialed the emergency number. "Please," she whispered urgently, "we need an ambulance at the Winscott mansion. It's an emergency. A boy is dying." The sound of Sylvia's heels in the hallway made her heart freeze. Sylvia's reaction upon seeing the ambulance arrive was terrifying. Her angelic face contorted into a mask of fury as she grabbed Marietta's arm. "You stupid maid," she hissed. "You have no idea what you've just done. Your sick little sister will pay dearly for your meddling." But it was too late. The paramedics were already entering the mansion, guided by a desperate Wesley. During the initial treatment, something fell from Sylvia's pocket. A bottle of medication with a partially scratched label. Marietta managed to discreetly pick it up, while the villain was distracted, trying to convince the paramedics that it was nothing more than a passing illness. "He has these kinds of reactions sometimes," she insisted, her forced smile trembling at the edges. "There's no need for a hospital." The chaos escalated when one of the paramedics found other suspicious bottles on Ronan's bedside table. "Ma'am," he said gravely, "these medications appear to have been tampered with." Sylvia visibly paled, her hands beginning to tremble as she tried to maintain her composure. "There must be some mistake," she stammered. "I picked up those prescriptions myself at the pharmacy." Wesley, who was watching the scene unfold in growing horror, began to piece together the puzzle. "Sylvia," his voice shook with restrained anger, "what exactly have you been giving my son?" The use of the word "my" did not go unnoticed by the villain, whose eyes darkened dangerously. "Your son?" she repeated with disdain. "That street rat is nobody's son." Sylvia's mask of perfection began to visibly crack as the paramedics prepared Ronan for transport. She paced back and forth, her heels marking a frantic rhythm on the marble floor. "You don't understand," she said, her voice alternating between pleading and threatening. "He needs to stay here, under my care. He can't go to the hospital." Marietta took advantage of the confusion to retrieve Ronan's diary, hidden under the mattress. As she flipped through the pages quickly, her eyes caught words that made her blood run cold. "She had a knife," the man screamed. So much blood in the alley. Before she could read further, Sylvia appeared behind her like a sinister apparition. "Looking for something interesting, dear Marietta." The situation reached its peak of tension when Wesley discovered more evidence in Sylvia's office. Forged medical prescriptions, notes on lethal dosages, a newspaper clipping about an unsolved murder. "My God," he murmured, his face pale with shock. What have you done?" Sylvia, cornered, let her mask of docility drop completely. "What have I done?" she laughed hysterically. "I did what was necessary." The sound of the ambulance siren cut through the night as the paramedics struggled to stabilize Ronan. Sylvia, rapidly losing control, made one last desperate bid. "If that brat goes to the hospital," she threatened, her voice shaking with rage, "you'll all bitterly regret it. I have connections that can make people disappear without a trace." In the midst of the chaos, Ronan briefly regained consciousness. His eyes met Wesley's as he was placed on the stretcher. "The alley," he whispered weakly. "She was there. The knife." Sylvia violently lunged toward the stretcher, but was restrained by Marietta and one of the paramedics. "Shut up, you miserable rat," she screamed, all pretense of refinement completely forgotten. The last image Marietta had before the ambulance departed was of Sylvia completely out of control, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her face a distorted mask of fury and fear. "This is not over," she screamed, as Wesley watched her with a mixture of horror and disgust. "No one will believe a dying beggar and an insignificant maid." The sound of the siren fading into the distance seemed to announce that Sylvia's reign of terror was finally beginning to crumble. The private San Francisco hospital had turned into a silent battlefield. Ronan was fighting for his life in the pediatric intensive care unit, while in the hallway, Sylvia maintained her performance of a dedicated mother before the doctors and nurses. "I don't understand how this could have happened," she lamented, perfectly calculated tears streaming down her face. "I followed all the prescriptions to the letter." Wesley, sitting a few meters away, watched his wife with an increasingly critical gaze. The medical team initiated a thorough investigation into the medications found at the mansion. The tampered bottles were sent for laboratory analysis, revealing a toxic mixture of substances. The hospital director, Dr. Ramirez, called an urgent meeting with Wesley. "Mr. Winscott," he said gravely, "we found traces of poison in several medications. This was no accident." The businessman felt the blood freeze in his veins. Sylvia wasted no time in constructing her defense. With tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, she began to plant seeds of doubt about Marietta. "Dear," she whispered to Wesley, "I've noticed Marietta has been acting very strange lately. Always messing with Ronan's medicines when she thought no one was looking. And you know how these maids can be jealous of our privileged lives." Her words were venom distilled in honey. The days turned into a macabre dance of accusations and suspicions. Wesley found himself divided between the increasingly incriminating evidence and Sylvia's seemingly plausible explanations. On one particularly tense night, he confronted his wife about the forged prescriptions found in her purse. "My love," she replied in a honey-filled voice, "those prescriptions were planted there. Someone is trying to frame me." Her eyes shone with false innocence. Marietta seized every moment alone at the hospital to collect evidence. Hidden in a supply closet, she photographed with her old cell phone every suspicious bottle, every incriminating document she found. "The truth must come out," she murmured, saving the evidence in a secret file. The sound of Sylvia's heels in the hallway made her tremble, but it did not stop her from continuing her mission. The situation became even more complicated when the police started asking questions about the tampered medications. Sylvia maintained her composure, but Marietta noticed how her fingers drummed nervously on her designer purse whenever the investigators approached. "It's all a terrible misunderstanding," she repeated like a mantra. "Ronan is like a son to me." The smile on her lips did not reach her cold eyes. One of the nurses found Ronan's diary hidden among his belongings at the hospital. Before he could read its contents, Sylvia appeared like an apparition, snatching the notebook from his hands. "This is private," she said sweetly, but her eyes promised retaliation. "Ronan has such a fertile imagination, you know. The fever makes him delirious and write nonsensical things." Wesley began to question every medical decision Sylvia tried to make for Ronan. "I think we should consult with other specialists," he said firmly, ignoring his wife's furious glare. "We need independent opinions." Sylvia felt her control slipping through her fingers like fine sand. "Don't you trust me anymore, dear?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Marietta discovered a hidden folder in the false bottom of Sylvia's drawer at the mansion, containing newspaper clippings, about mysterious deaths and forged documents. With shaking hands, she photographed each page, knowing that this evidence could be her death sentence if discovered. "Holy Mother of God," she murmured. "How much blood does this woman have on her hands?" The doctors began to notice suspicious patterns in Sylvia's visits to Ronan. The boy always seemed to worsen after being alone with her, even for a few minutes. One nurse caught the devoted mother tampering with the patient's IV drip, but Sylvia always had a ready explanation. "I was just adjusting his pillow, dear. These machines are so sensitive." The tension reached its peak when Wesley found a series of deleted electronic messages on Sylvia's computer, revealing contacts with suppliers of controlled substances. He confronted her in the hospital hallway, his voice shaking with barely restrained fury. "What does this mean?" Sylvia maintained her perfect smile, but her nails dug deeply into her own palms. "Darling, you're snooping through my personal files now?" Marietta noticed a significant change in Ronan's behavior whenever Sylvia approached his bedside. The heart monitor would spike, his small hands would grip the sheets tightly, and his eyes revealed a deep terror that words could not express. "Please," he would whisper when he thought no one else could hear, "don't let her hurt me again." The investigation took an unexpected turn when one of the tampered medications was traced back to an illegal pharmacy. Sylvia desperately tried to cover up her connections, but the noose was tightening. "It's all a conspiracy," she declared, her voice rising an octave or two. "Someone is trying to destroy our perfect family." The evidence continued to pile up, like pieces of a macabre puzzle. A security video from the hospital showed Sylvia altering Ronan's IV doses during the early morning hours. When confronted, her mask of perfection visibly cracked. "You don't understand," she hissed, her face contorted into an unrecognizable expression. "That brat needs to be silenced." The decisive moment came when Marietta found a recording on Ronan's cell phone, made on the night he was found at the mansion. The trembling voice of the boy narrated a story of horror that made the governess turn pale. "I saw her in the alley, with the knife," said the recording. Sylvia, who had silently followed Marietta, emerged from the shadows with a murderous glint in her eyes. "Where is that cell phone, you meddler?" she demanded, advancing threateningly. Sylvia chose the darkest hour of the night to make her visit to Ronan. With silent steps, she slid into the boy's hospital room, closing the door without a sound. She leaned over his bed, her red nails caressing the oxygen tube menacingly. "You know, little rat," she whispered, "accidents happen all the time in hospitals, especially during the wee hours when everyone is so tired." The terror in Ronan's eyes was palpable as he tried to reach the emergency button. Sylvia was quicker, snatching the device from his reach with a cruel smile. "How cute," she mocked. "Still thinks someone can save you. But do you know what happens to inconvenient witnesses? They suffer inexplicable heart attacks." Her fingers slid dangerously over the cardiac monitor, toying with the vital wires. Marietta, who had fallen asleep in the hallway chair, awoke with a start upon hearing a muffled groan coming from the room. She approached the half-open door silently, her blood freezing as she heard Sylvia voice increasingly explicit threats. "If you dare tell about that night in the alley," the villainess's voice was pure venom, "I'll make sure your death is as slow and pay Marietta-ful as his was." The secret began to unfold in Ronan's faltering words as he struggled against terror to speak. "I saw you in the alley, with the knife," he managed to mumble before Sylvia pressed a pillow against his face. "The businessman. He screamed so much." Marietta covered her mouth to stifle a scream, the puzzle pieces finally fitting into a macabre picture. The confrontation between Marietta and Sylvia erupted when the governess burst into the room, snatching the pillow from the villainess's hands. "You murderer!" accused Marietta, positioning herself protectively between Ronan and Sylvia. "Mrs." Winscott's mask of perfection fell away completely, revealing an expression twisted by evil. "You have no idea what I'm capable of, you meddling little maid," she hissed, advancing menacingly. Ronan's nightmares intensified with every hour, his repressed memories surfacing in terrifying flashes. "Blood, so much blood in the alley," he mumbled in his restless sleep. She was smiling as the knife. Sylvia watched from afar, her eyes shining with a mixture of hatred and panic as she plotted her next move. The tension reached unbearable levels when Sylvia intercepted Marietta in the medication storage room. Pressing the governess against the wall, her voice was a deadly whisper. "You really think you can stop me? I've gotten rid of problems before and I can do it again. Your little sister would be such an easy target." So fragile in her public hospital. Sylvia's plan began to take shape as she meticulously studied the hospital routines. Marietta caught her making notes about shift change schedules when the hallway was empty, the precise minutes nurses checked vital signs. "Everything has to be perfect," Sylvia muttered to herself, a sinister smile playing on her lips. Ronan's traumatic memories began to manifest in disturbing drawings he made during his waking hours. Images of an elegant woman wielding a knife, a dark alley stained crimson, a fallen man. Sylvia found the drawings before anyone else could see them, and her reaction was instant and violent. "You like drawing, don't you?" she whispered, tearing the papers into tiny shreds. "How about I give you something real to draw?" Marietta discovered the details of Sylvia's plan in an accidentally intercepted phone conversation. "I need it to be tonight," she was saying to someone. "Make it look like a natural complication. The boy is already weak. No one will question a cardiac arrest." The governess felt her heart skip a beat, knowing she had only hours to prevent a tragedy. Fear was a constant presence in Ronan's room. Every shadow could be Sylvia approaching, every sound the start of her macabre plan. The boy could hardly sleep, his eyes always fixed on the door, waiting for the moment his tormentor would return to finish what she started. "Please," he begged Marietta, "don't leave me alone with her. She'll kill me like she killed that man." Sylvia began laying the groundwork for her final plan, subtly manipulating the medical staff's perceptions. "I've noticed he's been having arrhythmia episodes," she would comment worriedly to the nurses. "And sometimes he seems to struggle breathing, even with the oxygen." Each word was carefully chosen to justify a future, fatal complication. The confrontation between Marietta and Sylvia reached its climax when the governess found a vial of poison hidden in the villainess's purse. "What do you intend to do with this?" Marietta confronted her, holding the evidence in trembling hands. Sylvia's smile was pure ice as she advanced. "You really want to find out, dear? Perhaps your sister Carmela needs a visit from me." The final hours of the night dragged like an endless darkness. Sylvia had bribed a night shift nurse to not notice certain alterations to Ronan's equipment. Marietta, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, watched the villainess make the final preparations for her night of terror. "Soon, soon," Sylvia softly sang, "all our little problems will disappear." The plan was about to be executed. Sylvia waited for the perfect moment when surveillance would be weakest and witnesses scarce. "Tonight," she thought, a cruel smile playing on her lips, "I will finally silence you forever, little rat." Marietta, however, had her own preparations underway, knowing this would be the last chance to save Ronan from the certain death Sylvia had so meticulously planned. The early morning at the hospital turned into a scene of terror when Sylvia executed her macabre plan. With footsteps as silent as a snake about to strike, she slid into Ronan's room, carrying a concealed syringe in the sleeve of her designer coat. The boy slept a restless sleep, his heart monitors filling the silence with rhythmic beeps. "It's time, little rat," she whispered, a cruel smile playing on her perfectly painted lips. "Let's make it look so natural that no one will ever suspect." Marietta, keeping vigil hidden in the supply closet, watched through the cracked door as Sylvia methodically prepared her murderous plan. The villain began by meticulously disabling each alarm on the medical equipment, her red nails contrasting with the white buttons of the machines. "It's amazing how hospitals can be such dangerous places," she softly sang as she tampered with the IV line. "So many accidents happen at night." Ronan awoke at the precise moment Sylvia prepared to inject the lethal contents of the syringe into his IV access. His eyes widened in terror as he recognized his tormentor leaning over him with a murderous gleam in her gaze. "Please," he stammered, trying to reach the emergency button. Sylvia gripped his arm with brutal force, her nails digging into the boy's fragile skin. "Shh, darling," she whispered. "Be a good boy and accept your fate. I promise it will be quick. Or not." The confrontation erupted when Marietta burst from her hiding place, launching herself at Sylvia, the instant the syringe neared the IV access. The two women rolled on the floor in a fierce struggle, the syringe flying under the bed. "You meddling maid!" Sylvia roared, her perfectly coiffed hair now in complete disarray. "I'll finish you and then your precious charge." Wesley, who had decided to pay a surprise night visit to his son, heard the commotion coming from the room. Approaching quickly, he caught fragments of the exchange that chilled his blood. "You won't tell anyone about the alley?" Sylvia screamed, now completely unhinged. That idiot businessman deserved every stab. The sound of Wesley's footsteps in the hallway made the villain freeze momentarily. Chaos ensued as Sylvia realized her husband's presence approaching. With surprising agility, she shoved Marietta against the medical equipment and quickly recomposed her mask of perfection. "Help!" she cried, instantly shifting into her victim role. "This crazed maid is trying to hurt our Ronan." Her false tears began to fall precisely as Wesley entered the room. The scene Wesley encountered was disconcerting. Overturned medical equipment, Marietta lying among the debris, Ronan trembling in his bed, and Sylvia, seemingly distraught, trying to protect the boy. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his gaze shifting between his sobbing wife and the struggling governess. "Darling," Sylvia began, "I caught Marietta trying to—" It was at this moment that Ronan found his voice, years of terror giving way to desperate courage. "She tried to kill me," he screamed, pointing at Sylvia. "She wants to silence me because I saw. Before he could complete the sentence, Sylvia lunged toward him, completely abandoning her loving mother facade. "Shut your mouth, you miserable rat!" she bellowed, revealing her true nature. Sylvia's outburst was explosive and terrifying. Her once calculating eyes now blazed with unbridled madness as she tried to reach Ronan. "You don't understand," she screamed, writhing against Wesley's attempts to restrain her. "He has to die. He knows too much. He saw everything that night." Her face, once a mask of perfection, twisted into a grotesque snarl. Marietta seized the moment of chaos to retrieve the syringe from under the bed, crucial evidence of Sylvia's murderous plan. "Mr. Winscott," she called, showing the object. She was going to inject this into Ronan's IV. She was planning to make it look like a heart attack. Sylvia let out a hysterical laugh as she saw her plan unraveling. "Evidence? You have evidence against me? Against Sylvia Winscott?" The fragments of the secret began to spill through Sylvia's disjointed words as she alternated between threats and pleas. He was there. That filthy brat was in the alley, saw everything. The knife, the blood. Wesley held his wife tighter, growing more horrified as he began to comprehend the monstrosity he had brought into his home. Ronan, though terrified, started to reveal what he had witnessed. "She killed a man in the alley. Behind the Italian restaurant," he said, his voice trembling. "He begged, but she just laughed as the knife." Sylvia let out an animalistic scream, trying to break free from Wesley to reach the boy. "I should have killed you when I had the chance, you street rat." The situation reached its climax when Sylvia, in a final act of desperation, managed to break free from Wesley and grab an abandoned scalpel from a nearby tray. "No one will believe you," she screamed, her eyes blazing with madness. "I'm Sylvia Winscott. I'm untouchable." Her hand trembled as she pointed the blade alternately at each person in the room. The secret Ronan carried finally began to take clear shape. Sylvia had taken the life of one of Wesley's business rivals in the alley weeks before ingratiating herself with him. The boy who used the alley as a shelter had witnessed the entire crime. "She planned it all," Ronan revealed through tears. "She got close to Mr. Winscott after. His voice failed as he relived the traumatic memories. In her final outburst, Sylvia revealed her true nature unequivocally. "Do you know why I killed that idiot?" she shouted, laughing hysterically. "Because he was in my way, just like this brat is now. I always get what I want. Always." Her face was twisted into a grotesque mask of pure evil, any remaining trace of her false elegance completely shattered. Sylvia, cornered by the emerging truth, made her last, desperate move. "If I'm going down," she declared, advancing with the scalpel in hand, "I'm taking this little rat with me." Ronan's scream of terror echoed through the room as Marietta and Wesley moved simultaneously to intercept the deranged criminal. Sylvia's meticulously constructed control began to unravel during an unexpected visit from the police inspector at the hospital. Sitting in the medical conference room, her perfectly manicured hands drummed nervously on the table as the investigator flipped through a thick dossier. "Mrs. Winscott," he began, his keen eyes studying her every reaction. "Can you explain why the medication records show so many inconsistencies?" For the first time since hatching her perfect plan, Sylvia felt beads of cold sweat trickling down her neck. "There must be some mistake," her voice faltered slightly, betraying her growing nervousness. Marietta took advantage of Sylvia's absence to execute her own investigative plan. With silent footsteps, the housekeeper slipped into her mistress's private study in the mansion. Years of service had taught her every nook of the house, including the hiding place of the spare key. Her hands trembled as she methodically rifled through each drawer until finding a false bottom in the last compartment. What she discovered there made her blood run cold. A black folder containing not only newspaper clippings about the murdered businessman, but also detailed notes on hospital accidents and a disturbing list of lethal substances. "Holy Mother of God," she murmured, frantically photographing each page with her old cell phone. At the hospital, Ronan began showing signs of an inner strength that surprised everyone. During one of Sylvia's intimidating visits, when she leaned over his bed with her usual menacing smile, the boy did not avert his gaze as he always did. His small eyes, previously constantly downcast in fear, met hers with an unexpected firmness. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," he declared, his voice still weak but laced with determination. Sylvia's mask visibly faltered, a flash of fury crossing her face before she could recompose herself. Wesley watched his wife's increasingly erratic behavior more closely. During a discussion about Ronan's treatment, he noticed how she seemed to momentarily lose control when questioned. Her hands, normally graceful in their studied gestures, clenched into fists of barely contained rage. "How dare you question me?" she hissed, momentarily forgetting her devoted wife facade. "After all I've done for our little Ronan." The secret investigation gained momentum when Marietta managed to make a copy of Sylvia's office keys at the hospital. During a particularly tense late night, the housekeeper uncovered a series of deleted emails that had been partially recovered. The messages revealed suspicious contacts with suppliers of controlled substances, and even more disturbingly, coded communications about permanently solving the street rat problem. The first public crack in Sylvia's perfect facade occurred during a meeting with the medical staff. When Dr. Ramirez presented evidence of medication tampering, she completely lost her composure. "How dare you question me?" she exploded, abruptly standing up and knocking over her chair. "Do you have any idea who I am, what I'm capable of?" The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the sound of her heels furiously striking the floor as she stormed out of the room, leaving dumbfounded doctors and nurses in her wake. The turning point came when Ronan recognized the murder weapon. During an apparently routine visit, Sylvia's designer purse fell, spilling its contents onto the hospital floor. Among lipsticks and silk handkerchiefs, a small ornate knife slipped out of a hidden compartment. The boy's eyes widened in instant recognition. "It's her!" he screamed, his body shaking violently. "The alley knife!" Sylvia dove to recover the weapon, but Marietta was faster, kicking it out of her reach. Wesley finally decided to confront the evidence he had collected. In his study at the mansion, he spread across the desk a series of incriminating documents: suspicious bank records, unexplained transfers, receipts for mysterious purchases. "Who are you really, Sylvia?" he asked, his voice laced with disappointment and contained anger. Her smile froze, turning into an unrecognizable expression of fury. "You have no idea what it takes to get where I am," she hissed, abandoning all pretense of sweetness. The situation exploded during a charity dinner at the hospital. Sylvia, already visibly unhinged after days of mounting pressure, completely lost her composure when one of the guests casually mentioned the unsolved case of the murdered businessman. Her champagne flute shattered on the floor, the golden liquid staining her designer dress like blood. "Shut up!" she screamed, her wild eyes darting around the ballroom in panic. "You know nothing. Nothing!" The horrified guests watched as she upended the table, years of studied elegance forgotten in seconds. Marietta took advantage of the chaos to retrieve the most crucial evidence. Ronan's diary describing the crime in childlike but accurate detail, Sylvia's incriminating documents, and the knife that now connected all the dots in the story. With trembling hands, the housekeeper hid it all in a place only she knew, knowing those pieces of evidence would be the key to exposing her mistress's true nature. Amidst the confusion, Ronan found the courage he needed. With a clear voice, despite the fear still visible in his eyes, he began recounting his story to everyone present. "I was sleeping in the alley that night," he started, each word laden with painful memories. "I saw when she arrived, all elegant. The man seemed to know her. Then she..." Before she could finish, Sylvia crossed the hall like a maddened beast, her fingers curved like claws ready to attack. "Shut that filthy mouth!" she roared, advancing towards the boy. "I'll end you like I should have done that night." Wesley and the security guards could barely restrain her as she struggled violently, her face a distorted mask of hatred and despair. Strands of her perfectly coiffed hair fell across her face, and her impeccable makeup dissolved with her tears of rage. The hall plunged into a sepulchral silence, broken only by Sylvia's hysterical cries. Her true nature was finally exposed, the mask of refinement completely shattered. "You don't understand," she screamed, thrashing in the guard's arms. "That idiot businessman was in my way, and this street rat, this worm had to be eliminated. I am Sylvia Winscott. I always get what I want." The scene culminated with Sylvia being forcibly removed from the hall, her threats echoing through the hospital corridors. "This isn't over," she bellowed, her face twisted in an unrecognizable expression of evil. "You'll all be sorry, every one of you." Marietta protectively embraced Ronan, while Wesley watched his wife being taken away, horror and disgust etched on his face. The truth was about to explode, and nothing could contain it any longer. Sylvia's last gambit came in the form of a masterful performance of remorse. Kneeling in Wesley's office, perfectly calculated tears streaming down her face, she pleaded for forgiveness. "My love, I made mistakes, but everything I did was out of love for you and Ronan." Her hands trembled as she held her husband's, but her eyes remained cold and calculating, planning her next move. Meanwhile, Marietta methodically organized all the evidence gathered. Ronan's diary, the incriminating documents, the photos of the tampered medication, all carefully catalogued into a devastating dossier. In her modest room at the back of the mansion, the housekeeper worked tirelessly, knowing this would be her only chance to expose the truth. "You won't get away this time, you poisonous snake," she muttered, storing a backup copy on a flash drive. Ronan, still in the hospital but growing stronger each day, finally found the courage to record his full testimony. With a trembling but determined voice, he recounted every detail of that fateful night in the alley. She was smiling while she used the knife. His voice faltered momentarily. The man begged, but she just laughed. Wesley delved into a deep investigation of his wife's past. Each layer he peeled away revealed more lies and horrors. He discovered that Sylvia had changed her name 3 times in the last 5 years. In every city, a trail of mysterious deaths followed her. "Dear God," he whispered, "what kind of monster did I marry?" The confrontation began to take shape, as Sylvia realized she was losing control of the situation. In a fit of rage, she barged into Marietta's room, ransacking every drawer in search of the evidence she knew existed. "Where is it? Where is it?" she screamed, throwing objects to the floor. Her mask of elegance completely forgotten as she trashed the housekeeper's room. The discoveries about her criminal past began to surface like bubbles in boiling water. Old newspapers revealed a string of accidents involving wealthy businessmen, all mysteriously dead after becoming involved with a woman who always disappeared soon after. The pattern was now crystal clear. In a desperate move, Sylvia tried to destroy all the evidence she could find. She set fire to documents in her office, but the blaze quickly spiraled out of control. "Let it burn!" she screamed hysterically as the staff rushed with extinguishers. "Burn it all, no one can prove anything." Ronan, watching the chaos unfold from the hospital window, made a courageous decision. With Marietta's help, he recorded a video detailing everything he had witnessed. "I'm not afraid of her anymore," he declared, his voice small but firm. "The truth needs to come out." Marietta chose the moment of dinner to unveil her devastating dossier. Before Wesley and the team of investigators, she presented each meticulously gathered piece of evidence. "Here is who Sylvia Winscott really is," she announced, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "Or should I say, Marisa Silva? Or perhaps Carmen Ruiz?" The truth hit Wesley like a punch to the gut. Every document, every photo, every shred of evidence painted a horrific picture of who his wife truly was. "You killed them all," he whispered, staring at Sylvia in revulsion. "You used them and discarded them like trash." Sylvia's public unmasking was spectacular in its violence. In the middle of the business dinner, as Marietta began handing out copies of the evidence to those present, she finally lost all control. "It's all lies," she screamed, hurling glasses and plates at the horrified guests. "You can't prove anything." The moment of ultimate revelation came when the police found the ornate knife, still stained with the victim's blood, hidden in a secret compartment at the mansion. Sylvia, upon seeing the murder weapon, finally collapsed completely. "You want to know why I killed them all?" she shouted, laughing hysterically. "Because they were weak, pathetic, just like all of you." Confronted with all the evidence, surrounded by police and witnesses, Sylvia showed her true face one last time. "You don't understand," she raved, writhing in her handcuffs. "I deserved it all, the money, the power, the status. I'd do it all again. That idiot businessman, he had it coming. And this street rat." Her eyes blazed with pure hatred as she glared at Ronan. "You should have stayed in that alley." The final scene was one of cruel irony. Sylvia, still in her now stained and torn designer dress, being dragged into the police van. Her perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared by tears of rage. "This isn't over," she screamed as she was taken away. "I am Sylvia Winscott. I always win." But this time her mask had fallen completely, revealing the monster that had always existed behind the facade of perfection. The Winscott mansion transformed into the stage for the final confrontation on a stormy night. In the library, Wesley gathered everyone involved. Ronan shivering slightly in his chair, Marietta standing protectively behind him, and Sylvia, her eyes sparking with a mixture of fury and desperation. "It's over, Sylvia," Wesley declared, his voice laden with profound sadness. "It's time for the truth to come out." Ronan, gathering all his courage, began to tell his story. "I had been sleeping in that alley for weeks." His small voice echoed in the tense silence of the library. "That night a luxury car stopped. Mrs. Winscott got out, all elegant. A man followed her. They were arguing about money, about a company. Sylvia took a threatening step towards the boy, but Marietta stopped her. "Go on, Ronan," Wesley gently encouraged, while keeping Sylvia under his watchful gaze. The boy swallowed hard before continuing. She had a hidden knife. The man didn't see it. He was talking about evidence, about reporting someone." Then she smiled. That same smile she gave when she hurt me here in the mansion. And attacked. Marietta opened a thick folder on the table, spreading out documents, photos, and newspaper clippings. "It wasn't her first crime, Mr. Winscott," the governess revealed. "In every city, the same pattern. She would get close to wealthy businessmen. Accidents would happen, and she would inherit fortunes. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 different identities, 3 dead husbands, 3 vanished fortunes." Sylvia exploded into a hysterical laugh. "You really think you can destroy me? I'm Sylvia Winscott. I'm untouchable." Her mask of elegance had shattered completely, revealing the cruel killer underneath. "Those fools deserved to die. They were weak, pathetic. Like you, Wesley, so easily manipulated with your longing for a perfect family." Ronan continued his account, tears silently streaming down his face. After the man stopped moving, she saw me, smiled and said it would be our little secret, that no one would believe a street rat anyway." His voice faltered. "When I saw her here in the mansion that first day, I knew she had come to find me, to silence me." Wesley, devastated by the revelation, confronted his wife. "The businessman you killed was Desmond Hensley, my partner, who mysteriously disappeared. You planned it all from the start, didn't you? Killed my friend, and then approached me." Sylvia smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "He was going to ruin everything. He discovered my other identities, threatened to expose my past. It was so easy to seduce him and lure him to that alley. In a desperate move, Sylvia pulled a gun from her designer purse. "No one will destroy what I've built," she screamed, alternately pointing the gun at each person in the room. "I'll kill all of you and start over somewhere else." Kayat's always worked before. Her eyes shone with a devastating madness. Marietta, acting on instinct, pushed Ronan behind a bookshelf while Wesley tried to disarm Sylvia. In the ensuing struggle, shots rang out, shattering the night's silence. "You won't hurt anyone else," Marietta shouted, managing to knock the gun from Sylvia's hands with a silver tray. With trembling hands, Wesley called the police. "Please, come quickly," his voice choked with tears. "I've found Desmond Hensley's killer. It's my wife." Sylvia, now disarmed but still dangerous, laughed hysterically. "You sentimental fool, always so predictable, so manipulable." The police's arrival was swift and dramatic. Sylvia, even handcuffed, maintained her arrogant demeanor. "Do you know how many judges and cops I have in my pocket?" she taunted. "In a week, I'll be free, and you?" Her gaze promised vengeance as she was dragged out of the mansion. Then the final revelation hit everyone like a thunderbolt. Ronan, still trembling, looked at Wesley with tearful eyes. "Mr. Winscott, the man she killed, before he died, he said something about a lost son." The businessman froze, old memories resurfacing. Desmond had a son who disappeared years ago. Genetic tests would later confirm Ronan was Desmond Hensley's long-lost son, missing after his mother's death. Fate, in its cruel irony, had brought the boy straight to the home of his father's best friend. Wesley, in tears, embraced the son of his murdered friend. "You're home now, son. Finally home." Marietta watched the scene with silent tears of joy. The truth had triumphed, evil had been punished, and a new family was born from the ashes of tragedy. Sylvia, upon discovering Ronan's true identity through the bars of her cell, howled in rage at the final irony of her fate. The street urchin she had tried to silence was, in fact, the rightful heir to the very fortune she had coveted. At the Winscott mansion, the shadows of the past began to dissipate. Wesley, determined to honor his friend's memory, initiated proceedings to officially adopt Ronan. Marietta was promoted to house administrator, her loyalty and courage rewarded with a position of trust in the family. And Ronan, the boy who survived to tell the truth, finally found the home and love he had always deserved. Sylvia's final image was her transfer to the women's penitentiary, her orange uniform a grotesque contrast to her former designer clothes. Her empire of lies had crumbled, and she would now face justice for her crimes. As she was led away, her scream of rage echoed through the corridors. "You haven't seen the last of Sylvia Winscott." But everyone knew her reign of terror had come to an end. The Winscott mansion was gradually transforming, shedding the shadows of the past to make way for an atmosphere of hope. The most prestigious law firm in the country was overseeing the adoption process of Ronan, now confirmed as Desmond Hensley's biological son. Wesley, determined to honor his friend's memory, decided not only to legally adopt the boy, but also to ensure that he inherited both the Hensley and Winscott fortunes. "He deserves everything," he declared emotionally during a meeting with the lawyers. "He's my son now in every sense." Ronan was beginning his recovery, not only physical but mainly emotional. With the help of therapists specialized in childhood trauma, he began to process the horrors he had endured. The nights of terror gradually gave way to more peaceful slumbers, although there were still occasional nightmares. "Yesterday I dreamed of my real father," he confided in Marietta during breakfast. But this time he was smiling at me. The once silent corridors of the mansion now echoed with sounds of life and renewal. Wesley personally supervised the renovation of Ronan's room, transforming it into a cheerful and welcoming space. The dark walls gave way to soft and comforting tones, and a small library was installed in a corner, filled with the children's books the boy had never had a chance to read. "I want every inch of this place to breathe love," he insisted, personally choosing every detail. Marietta, now officially the head housekeeper and Ronan's tutor, was fully dedicated to creating a healthy family environment. Her homemade recipes and maternal care helped heal not only the boy's body but also his soul. "My mother taught me that love is shown in small gestures," she would say, while preparing Ronan's favorite hot chocolate on cold nights. The most remarkable transformation, however, was in Wesley himself. The workaholic businessman was now completely reorganizing his priorities. Meetings were rescheduled to accompany Ronan's therapy sessions, and important documents waited while he helped his son with his homework. "I lost so much time pursuing success," he reflected, "when the true wealth was in building a real family." The traumas of the past still appeared in unexpected moments. One night during dinner, the sound of falling cutlery made Ronan instinctively cower. Wesley was immediately by his side, gently embracing him. "It's okay, son," he whispered. "You're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again." Marietta, watching the scene, discreetly wiped away her tears of emotion. Adapting to the new life brought its own challenges. Ronan, accustomed to the harsh streets, sometimes felt overwhelmed by so much comfort and attention. "It's strange," he confessed to Marietta one afternoon in the garden. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream that I'll be back in that alleyway." The housekeeper squeezed his hand affectionately. "But you're not. This is your reality now." Final revelations about the past surfaced, like the last pieces of a painful puzzle. Through investigations, they discovered that Ronan's biological mother had not abandoned her son as the record stated. She had been another victim of Sylvia's criminal scheme. "She tried to protect me," Ronan wept upon learning the truth. "So until the end, she tried to save me." The family bonds strengthened with each small victory, the first dad that Ronan managed to say to Wesley, the first genuine smile during a walk in the park, the first night without nightmares. Each moment was celebrated as a precious treasure. "We're building happy memories," Wesley would say, photographing every meaningful instant. Emotional healing came in gentle waves of understanding and acceptance. During a family therapy session, Ronan finally managed to express his deepest fears. "I'm afraid of being abandoned again," he admitted, his voice small but courageous. Wesley and Marietta, seated by his side, solemnly promised never to leave him. The day of the finalization of the adoption arrived like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. In court, Ronan Hensley Winscott held the hands of his new legal father and his beloved Marietta, now officially his guardian. The judge, moved by the story, made a point of emphasizing, "Today we are not only legalizing an adoption, we are celebrating the triumph of love over evil." The celebration at the mansion was intimate, but profoundly meaningful. Staff members who had resisted Sylvia's reign of terror gathered to celebrate the new beginning. Marietta, now wearing an elegant outfit that Wesley had insisted on gifting her, smiled as she watched Ronan happily running through the gardens. "It seems like a miracle," she commented, "to see so much joy where there was once only darkness." Marietta's promotion to an official member of the family was announced during the celebratory dinner. "You're not just our housekeeper," Wesley declared. "You're a fundamental part of this family. The mother Ronan needed, the friend I needed." The emotional embrace that followed sealed a union that transcended blood ties. Ronan, finally at peace with his past and hopeful for his future, slept peacefully in his renovated room. On his desk, a newly framed photo showed his biological father alongside Wesley, both young and smiling. Next to it, a current photo with his new family, him, Wesley, and Marietta, all genuinely happy smiles. True happiness manifested in small moments: laughter during breakfast, bedtime reading sessions, Sunday walks in the garden. The Winscott mansion, once a stage for horrors, now overflowed with love and hope. As Marietta used to say while watching father and son playing in the garden, "Sometimes you have to go through the deepest darkness to find the brightest light." The Santa Maria Women's Penitentiary was a world completely opposite to the luxurious salons that Sylvia Winscott used to frequent. In her faded orange uniform, number 341, sewn onto the pocket, she scrubbed the floor of the cafeteria while other inmates purposefully dropped food and dirt in her path. "Oops, sorry, princess," they mocked, dragging muddy boots over the floor she had just cleaned. Her nails, once perfectly manicured, were now broken and dirty from constant work. The contrast between her current and past life could not be more stark. Her designer clothes had been replaced by rough, worn uniforms. Her imported creams gave way to a cheap soap that dried out her skin. Her hair, previously treated at the best salons, was now dull and unkempt. "Is the lady enjoying the spa?" the other prisoners taunted, throwing dirty mop water in her direction. The cafeteria was her greatest daily humiliation. Accustomed to dining in starred restaurants, she now faced endless lines for food she could barely swallow. "What's the matter, you disgusting thing? Not to your liking?" the inmates provoked, purposefully dropping her plates. "Maybe you'd prefer to eat off the floor like you made others eat, you high-class rat." Sylvia had become the favorite target of humiliations, her former arrogance attracting constant retaliation. Nights were filled with torturous memories of her luxurious past. In her tiny cell, lying on a thin, uncomfortable mattress, she mentally relived her glory days. But every memory now had a bitter taste of defeat. The inmates made sure to remind her daily of her downfall. "Hey, fancy scum, time to clean the bathrooms," they shouted, piling more work on her already tired shoulders. Her attempts to maintain some dignity were constantly frustrated. During lawyer visits, when she tried to appear minimally put together, the other inmates made sure to accidentally spill coffee or soup on her freshly washed clothes. "Sorry, Your Highness, my hand slipped." They laughed, watching her despair at trying to maintain appearances. Her legal appeals failed one after another. Each denial was celebrated with special parties in the prison, her cellmates making sure to throw buckets of dirty water during her sleep or hide her few personal belongings in impossible places. "Looking for something, madame?" they taunted, while she desperately rummaged through the trash for her only old photo. Work in the prison laundry was particularly humiliating. Sylvia, who had never washed a piece of clothing in her life, now spent hours sorting dirty uniforms and handling cheap cleaning products that left her hands rough and red. "Watch out for the stains, princess," the other inmates mocked, purposefully mixing up the clothes she had just organized. Loneliness was her most constant companion. No one visited her, no letters arrived. Her former friends from high society had completely abandoned her. During visiting hours, she hid in her cell, unable to bear the sight of other inmates receiving affection and attention from their families. The inmates didn't miss the opportunity to rub it in. How sad. No one loves the prison princess. In her work in the prison kitchen, Sylvia was assigned the most degrading tasks: cleaning grease, peeling vegetables, washing huge pots. Her co-workers made sure to forget food scraps in the pots she needed to clean. "Feeling disgusted, madame? I thought you liked filth, since you kept sending others into the mud." Sundays, when the inmates had permission for outdoor activities, were particularly cruel. Sylvia was invited to clean the courtyard, while the others played volleyball or sunbathed. Occasionally, stray mud balls hit her back, followed by false apologies and mocking laughter. News from the outside world only increased her torture. Newspapers that occasionally circulated in the prison featured photos of the happy Winscott family. Wesley, Ronan and Marietta at charity events, smiling and united. "Look at that, you miserable snake," the inmates taunted, rubbing the photos in her face. "They're much better off without you." The worst moment of her day was when she had to clean the administrative corridors. Through the windows, she could see the free world that no longer belonged to her. Sometimes she caught glimpses of luxury cars passing by, the type of vehicle she used to drive. The other inmates made sure to comment, "Missing your imported car, princess? Here the only transportation is the cleaning cart." During meals, she was forced to sit alone at a distant table, where other inmates accidentally dropped food and drink remnants. "This food isn't worthy of your highness?" they mocked. "You must be missing your fancy dinners." Sylvia swallowed not only the bad food, but also her shattered pride. Poetic justice completed itself in every small detail of her new life. She, who had so despised poor and simple people, now lived in conditions she considered subhuman. Her skin, once protected by expensive creams, was now dried out and rough. Her feet, accustomed to imported heels, now wore cheap rubber slippers that left blisters. The final contrast came through one last news from the outside world. The Winscott Hensley Foundation, created by Wesley and Ronan, now helped street children, offering them shelter, education, and love. Marietta personally coordinated the projects, transforming tragedy into hope. Sylvia, cleaning the prison floor with her worn-out mop, finally understood the meaning of true wealth, something that, in her greed and cruelty, she had never known. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, filled with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.